So I'm Ari Levy. I'm a technology reporter at CNBC in San Francisco, primarily writing for the website. And maybe I'll let these guys quickly introduce themselves while we're figuring out what we're doing here, and then we'll get started. Shireen.
Hi, I'm Shireen Santhosham. I am the Chief Innovation Officer for Mayor Sam Liccardo in San Jose.
Doron Rotman, I lead KPMG's privacy practice in the US.
David Cowan of Bessemer Venture Partners, and I run our cybersecurity practice.
Hi, I'm Aaron Bell. I'm the CEO of AdRoll, based in San Francisco, and we're the world's most widely adopted programmatic advertising platform.
Great. So is this working? Yeah. So we're going to talk. Okay. So we're going to talk about the use of data in all sorts of different ways that maybe we don't talk about on a daily basis, but as they pertain to our lives in politics, in our private lives, our public lives, and where this sort of all intersects with the commercial world. And so I wanted to start by asking Aaron, AdRoll as a retargeting company is sort of, okay, I'm not going to butcher it, but I was going to say following us around the web and giving, showing ads to us at what we think are relevant times. Is that fair enough?
That's one of
the
more friendly.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Relevant times and places. And you do have a business, or part of your product is used in political campaigns quite a bit. And so maybe talk a little bit about how it's used in politics, how it's been used in this election, even if you can, and how it's advanced in this election versus 4 years ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, going back a little further even.
Sure. So we're run an advertising company, AdRoll in San Francisco. And we're a programmatic advertising company, which means that we use a lot of data to be able to target ads. We try to show ads to the right people at the right time with the right message. And the world has changed quite a bit since the 2012 or 2008 elections. People spend a lot less time watching TV now. People get their information from all sorts of different sources, from mobile phones, from social media. And so the sophistication of advertising has changed quite a bit as well, in addition to people's attention spans. So you see, I think in this last election cycle, there's been a lot more going on on the advertising side and on the social media side. An example of that would be, like on the social media side, obviously, Donald Trump has been able to use that bullhorn very effectively and react to things going on in the news. He's able to use entertainment as a way to inform a large base of people who would vote for him. And then Hillary, now who's possibly going to be the nominee on the Democratic side, is also using social media, but she's also using things like ad tech, where when Donald Trump talked about Hillary, using the women's card, Hillary was able to respond very quickly with an advertising campaign on the internet, trying to get women to purchase a woman's card identity, and she raised a few $1 million very quickly on that. And programmatic advertising lets that happen. Programmatic advertising allows, in this campaign, the candidates to be very prescriptive in who they target ads to in terms of geographies or demographics. There's a lot more artificial intelligence, machine learning you can use now to do multidimensional models where you can discover pools of potential voters that in the old days you wouldn't have been able to figure out that they're interested in what you're doing, and you're just able to adapt much more quickly in a campaign.
And can you just quickly compare that to say how an SMB uses similar personal data? How is it similar and how is it different to that?
So it's similar in that these campaigns come up to speed very quickly, and they evolve over time, and they might disappear all of a sudden as well. But they use a lot of the same practices. A lot of the campaigns actually use advertising to sell different sorts of political swag, like hats and shirts. And actually, it's been said that Donald Trump has spent more on hats than advertising, on his Make America Great Again hats than advertising. What we do at AdRoll is we sort of target people at different states of interest. For example, we might want to raise awareness for a candidate, and then that person shows up at a candidate's website, and then we try to get them to perhaps donate. If they donate, maybe they're really engaged. Maybe we can get them to volunteer. Or if they're not interested in those two things, maybe we get the candidate. Maybe we can get the person just to come to a rally. So depending on their intent and interest, we can show different messaging to try to help them along in their support of a candidate.
And David or Daron, whoever wants to hop in first here, what should someone engaging with one of these websites expect in terms of privacy relative to what they would expect in terms of privacy if they were shopping or listening to music or surfing the web? Is there any difference at all? Are they aware of what's happening?
So there are two ways to answer the question. When you say, should it be any different? I think when people think about the issues of what it means to have your political affiliations be tracked, I think we all might feel that it should be different, that especially when one of the candidates has already stated as a major policy that he's going to create a database to track people of certain religion. It makes you think maybe it's important to think about what these people know about me. And it may be even more important, and in the United States we generally haven't really thought about political freedom very much because we just take it for granted. But it's actually much more important in the long run than even protecting our financial identities and things like that. Now, if you say, should they expect it, meaning, is it reasonable to expect it? They should when we engage in those sites, I think should expect much less privacy. And the reason for that is that when we are shopping on Amazon or any Zulily or Blue Nile or anywhere, these companies have developed over time systems. They have to be PCI compliant. They have, if they're public companies, they have other kinds of compliance issues. They have the SEC now to worry about. They have the FTC now to worry about. Now they have European regulators to worry about. And so there's no doubt that they are establishing standards around protecting the data they're collecting in a much more comforting way than these campaigns who are very quickly coming online. They don't have CISOs and IT groups who are spending years going through compliance issues trying to figure out how they're going to protect the data they're collecting. So regardless of what you think about the intentions of the candidates and whether they themselves will actually abuse the data, you have to consider that any time a trove of data like this is collected, it becomes exposed to the internet and other people can get access to it. And these political campaigns, I am absolutely sure, are much, much more vulnerable to attack than the much more robust e-commerce systems that we shop at.
And if I can add here, there's already one case where even within the same political party, two candidates had personalized data sets, and due to programming issues, allegedly one candidate had access to the confidential information of another candidate. So it will happen. And when those campaigns shut down, and now we're down to a smaller number of candidates, the question is always, do they have the proper procedures and policies to address data hygiene, to properly dispose of the data in a secure way versus just exposing that data to inappropriate use? And you mentioned Europe. So in Europe, information about political affiliation is considered one of the more sensitive types of information that should have stronger safeguards compared to other types of information, including financial data, because of sensitivity. And this is not necessarily the case in the US.
So are there rules or standards as to how that data is extinguished or whatever the proper term is when the campaigns end?
In the US?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. I guess, Aaron, are you aware of even what the conversation around that is?
Well, on the extinguished side, I think there's been counter examples. I think when Romney, and everybody just started the campaign using Romney data. I think when Scott Walker dropped out, his data was pilfered and sold because he's trying to pay off debts. I'm not sure what the policies are between, like, I mentioned Bernie and Hillary had some issues earlier in the campaign due to a programming error and some subordinate people running the software. Actually shows how important these databases are, and both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both have relationships with major centralized databases that the different campaigns use, and you wonder when let's say Sanders does suspend his campaign. Does he broker a deal with Hillary to be able to help the Democratic Party become stronger by recruiting, using their data lists? I'm not sure if there's privacies around that. There are a lot of policies around using voter registration data in the U.S., which are regulated, and there's large fees or criminal charges if you misused it. You definitely can't use voter data for things like commercial purposes, and there's all sorts of rules around the registration piece of it. But as far as the data they're collecting on their own, under their own privacy policies, that's sort of fair game.
Shireen, what, as a part of a large city, working for a large city, as the first chief innovation officer, been there for 4 months, right? What kinds of data are you seeing? Are you parsing through? And I guess in general, what are you looking for?
Sure. So, my role here is really not to comment so much on the campaign, but comment on what happens after a campaign and how do you think about using data for governing. And I would take a more positive view on the use of data than what has been shared here. So San Jose, just in March, we passed our first open data policy. So now all of the data from the city will be open to the public, open to the public, machine readable and usable, and that's over 600 data sets, except in cases where there are sort of security issues or privacy issues. So you can imagine, someone's a victim of a crime and that kind of data is very sensitive, so we don't want to share it. At the same time, we're also building an IoT network in the city, so we're gonna have a lot of information coming in many different formats. And the benefits of that are immense to a city. Like a city like ours, we're actually the most thinly staffed major city in America. We have a very small budget relative to the million people that we serve. And what data does is it allows us to target those resources very well, right? So they do things like we can look at hotspot crime areas. We can look at hotspot traffic incidents. We can think about public safety in new ways. And so it allows us to be, more effective, and it also allows us to have a multiplier effect around using our civic tech community. So we can't always afford all the skills that all of you have, but with all of that data open, we have hackers and coders who actually visualize the data and help us find issues that otherwise would be unavailable. And I'd say another interesting thing that we're doing is we just joined the White House Police Data Initiative. So there's about 50 jurisdictions around the country out of a couple thousand that have joined President Obama's administration in order to build trust with community. So all these sort of racial issues that we've had around the country, publish data sets around the use of force by police officers, complaint data. And what you find for the cities that have been willing to share this data is that you start to rebuild that public trust and accountability. So I would say I'd have a much more positive view of the data that we use.
And talk a little bit about the deal with Facebook.
Sure. So we recently, for those of you who sat in on Jay Parekh's talk earlier today, we're working with Facebook to pilot test their Terragraph technology, which is essentially amplifying the current Wi-Fi network that we have, and will give free gigabit speed Wi-Fi to our downtown corridor and to lots of low-income communities around San Jose. And this is the technology that they're then going to use. They're going to test and stabilize it in San Jose, it will be open source, like a lot of the other initiatives that they are launching this year. And then will be used to deploy all around the world. So this is for urban environments, and will expand digital access and build sort of digital infrastructure for accelerating adoption of new technologies.
And what, how do you sort of separate the data that Facebook sees from that versus what they don't see?
So, I mean, it's just infrastructure, right? So this is like having any other free Wi-Fi in any other city. And they're using the data right now to help stabilize the network, and will hand it over to us. But there isn't, I think for every interaction that we have with a private sector company, we are, first and foremost looking at privacy concerns of our citizens, and balancing that against sort of like the public good that we will get out of aggregating that data. And in this case, there isn't. We didn't see any sort of major issue. I think for consumers who are using any public Wi-Fi network, you always have to be more vigilant when you're on those networks than if you are on a private network. And so that sort of same level of vigilance is here, but we don't foresee any sort of big issues.
We talked a little bit about, there's a certain amount of privacy we inherently give up when we're using connected devices, and that there's a certain amount of data that the companies need in order to give us the best services. How should we think about the line between where is the line that companies, and I realize this is a really broad question, but curious to sort of where you are in thinking about it, the line that companies need to draw in terms of how much of that they're accessing, and when it's too much, and how much the consumer should know about what they're divulging. I'll just throw that open.
Sure. So, just as a citizen, I'll start, and I'll say that I appreciate targeted advertising. I appreciate it. I appreciate recommendations from Netflix, et cetera. I mean, I appreciate when my government agencies are able to provide services using data. And so I'm not negative on data and using data at all. And I think what you're doing and what our White House is doing around some of their data initiatives, they really bode well for the future of government services. I think that in general, whether we're talking about government services or any commercial services, a very important place to draw the line is where the profiling that you're doing of the user becomes identifiable to me. So if you're looking at my cookies to do retargeting, that's fine. If you're profiling my device so that you can give me a better video streaming experience, that's fine. If you're actually somehow keeping this information on an account with my name on it, that may be perfectly fine as well. It may be that that's how you're going to bring me all kinds of great services. But when you get to that part of data collection, it's critical that you tell the user you're doing it, and that you make it very, very clear, we're taking your information, and if you don't vote, if I don't win the nomination, I'm going to go sell this to the other candidate. I mean, that you just have to give that disclosure, and then we can all make our own decisions about whether we want to give up that information or not. Once they disclose it, you can't make a moral judgment as to whether they should be doing it or not if you have a consenting adult on the other side sharing the information.
And Jerome, maybe as you answer, talk about again, where is the law on this?
So the challenge here is law is so behind technology that I think it's more about a code of conduct, a moral code of conduct. Laws in Europe are, unless it's permissible, you can't do it. Laws here are, unless it's illegal or you're not allowed, you can do anything you want. It's a very different approach. So for me, it's a lot about like a stool, with a three-legged stool. First of all, it's about being transparent. Say what you do what you say. The second part is being secure. Secure the data. Because the biggest risk here is we collect vast volumes of very sensitive information, and you don't want that information to be breached and get to the wrong hands. Let's go and look at a great example this year with Ashley Madison's breach. That information was used to try and really extract information.
And maybe talk about that breach in contrast to some of the other breaches. What was different about that one?
Well, you have a site that was created to support activity that is not supported by a large percentage of the population. The tagline was, we're the safe, secure way to
Do something.
do something, which you want to keep in secret from your spouse or your colleagues, whatever. And now that information has become public. Now that information can be used for blackmail, for a lot of other purposes. What I found actually very interesting is now there's a pending class action against them, and the people who actually are submitting the class action want to remain anonymous. There's a court decision this week that actually the class action representatives have to divulge their name, because you need to validate they are members of the class and they can represent the class. So, whereas if you conduct a regular commercial business and you buy something, and let's say I buy something in an e-commerce site and that site was hacked and my financial information was breached, well, I've got safeguards, I can get a new credit card, I can put a credit freeze on my account. But if now, on the other hand, I perform a specific activity, and now my spouse knows about it, there's nothing I can reverse about it. So the same goes for political discussions. If now everybody knows that I support candidate X and something happens, well, there's no way I can change it.
We only have a few minutes left. Maybe one question from the audience, quickly. There's a microphone right behind you if you want to.
Me? Yeah, you mentioned about disclosure, that if you disclose it to a consumer, then it's a consumer's choice to read that disclosure, right? So we all have smartphone connected devices, right? And the disclosures run 20, 30, 40 pages and small fonts, right? People just go click through, right? We don't really know what's in the disclosure. Like if I even download an app, Facebook app, just collecting everything on my phone, right? So how do we protect ourselves against these disclosures? How do we handle that?
So I think there's two answers to that. One is that even if you don't read the EULA, as long as what I've often seen happen, somebody does read it, and then somebody writes a blog and it gets out there and says, hey, you realize this app is doing this thing, and then there it is in the EULA, everybody can see it. So that's not perfect. The highest standard is to do what Facebook is doing now, which is they make it super clear that, hey, if you allow this Facebook Connect, this is exactly the types of information that we're going to share with this vendor. Is that okay? So to your point, it's you could do it openly, or you could do it as sneakily as you can. Even the sneaky folks are going to get caught.
Yeah. And I think the other part is there are a lot of discussions about the example of food labels. We have a very clear, very simple label. It's standard, and everybody understands it, hopefully. And you really don't need a lot of values. So there's a lot of discussion about transforming privacy notices to something similar, where you reduce it to a certain number of parameters, and at least you can get a very quick understanding of what's going to happen with your data. And statistics, by the way, research shows that the number of people who read those privacy notices is actually increasing, because there is a concern. There is a change in mindset with the U.S. population.
I think we have to wrap up 10 or 15 seconds either, Shireen or Aaron.
Sure, I think the best way to sum up your question and the question of the audience is I think people have a right to not be surprised. And I think you can do so much with terms of service. And we actually track terms of like how much time people spend on our terms of service across the world, and it's more than you would think. And it's more in certain geographies. But like as representing the ad company, like we are incentivized to put the end user, the consumer, in the driver's seat. We don't want to show ads of people who don't want to see ads, because they're not going to be receptive to those ads.
And you're going to pay for them.
And we're going to pay for them as well. And we don't want people to install things like ad block, because they hate advertising and they think it collects too much data. We want to come up with ways where we can help support publishers, people create content in a way that is as user friendly as possible, and try to get a win-win-win.
Okay.
And I think on our side, from this panel, you can see the rules are evolving, right? They're evolving as we go along. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of fear from the public around what is happening. And from a government perspective, I would say, there is a tendency in government to be very risk averse and say, okay, then we just won't play. But that will keep the dialogue held back, and government will fall further behind. So one of the things we're trying to do in San Jose is we're going to experiment and work with the private sector and go on this journey together, because I think it's very important that we lead being here in Silicon Valley.
Okay, well, I don't think we've covered every question on the topic, but we're out of time. So thanks a lot, and enjoy the conference.